just introduce yourself and tell me about your rock and roll dream.
Hey,
How it started.
I'm Chris Price. I am a musician, songwriter, producer, all of that, and I've always dreamt of playing and singing to as many people as I possibly could, and I'm still working on it.
That's great. Do you remember the first time you thought, that's what I want to do?
Yeah, when I was really little, I was obsessed with Michael Jackson, and I used to watch, he had a video called Michael Jackson's Moonwalker, and it was like a collection of music videos around a story where Joe Pesci was like chasing him or something, and it all ended in a big concert where he does Come Together by the Beatles. And I just remember like just wanting to be Michael Jackson, basically. I would do all the moves and like put on a show for my parents, and you know, my dad's a musician and producer and songwriter as well, and so we had a studio in the house also. So I grew up around musicians and around recording, and I feel very at home in a studio also. So that was always, it was always there. I started playing piano when I was 4 years old. So yeah, I've always wanted to do that, but there was a detour at one point, like when I was like 12 or 13. I thought I don't want to be a musician, I want to be an actor. So I was trying like the child actor thing for a little while. It didn't get too far, and went back to music. Yeah.
Is that when you met Christina Aguilera?
That's right. My dad worked with her, and he did her Spanish album. She came to our house to do that record. She hadn't even put out her second single yet. Just the first one, the Genie in the Bottle song, was out at the time. So she was very new to success and fame and all that. So I kind of like, it was really interesting to meet her at that point in her life, because you know, she was always a performer. She was on the Mickey Mouse Club when she was little, and so she never really had a lot of peers, a lot of friends her own age. A lot of people around her were like handlers or record company people, executives. People would say yes to her all the time. She didn't have a lot of real friends her own age, and I was kind of close to her in age. So we bonded. We got along really well in those days. It was a special time for her because she was just starting to skyrocket, you know? And I've seen that happen to a lot of people, you know? I've been around it a lot.
So you grew up in Miami.
Yeah.
And then what made you decide to come to Los Angeles?
Well, we got signed. I was in a band with my brothers, and we got signed to Geffen Records, and they're here. So we thought we need to be where they are, because if we're on the other side of the country, they're not going to be thinking about us, and we want them to be thinking about us. So we came here in 2006. It's been 11 years now, almost, that I've been here in LA, and I love it. You know, Miami is fine. Like, it's a fun place to visit, but for what I do, it's great if you're a Latin musician or a rapper or an EDM guy, and I'm none of those things. So LA is a much more comfortable place for me. You know, I probably would have wound up here no matter what.
So what's a typical day like for you?
There is no typical day. Sometimes I'm like, I've got a full card for days on end, and it's just constant working. I'm producing this person, I'm making little lyric videos for my music, I'm making phone calls to a record company to try and set something up, or sometimes there's nothing going on and I'm sitting around feeling like a lazy sack of crap because there's nothing going on, you know? But that's the way the music business is. It's like everything all at once and then nothing for a while.
Okay.
You know?
Okay. Have you ever had to have a job that was not in music?
Yeah, no, I currently do other things. Like I work a courier service for Amazon in my spare time.
Mm-hmm.
You gotta do something to pay the bills, especially when there's nothing going on. Like, I try as hard as I can to always just make money making music, and sometimes I'm pretty successful at that, and I can go for several months without any need for any other job. but then there's the lean months, and you gotta have something, you know.
And so then, what is your future rock and roll dream?
Well, since I started writing songs and started like thinking I want to be in a band and playing and singing my own music, I always had a fantasy that I would one day be on the cover of Rolling Stone holding a bunch of vinyl, a bunch of like great records, things that I'm really into. Just this image that I always had in my head. My dream would be to be recognized amongst the people that I respect, the artists that I love, you know, to be put on the same level as them. And you know, fame is fine, but that's not like, I'm not chasing like a bunch of people recognizing me on the street. If that happens, great. That just means that you're successful and you're doing something good. But I'm looking for a legacy. You know, I want to make records that people think are great, and that get talked about and written about. You know, and if that happens later, I'm okay. Some of my favorite artists didn't find their way when they were young, and later on became cult figures, you know, like Emmett Rhodes, who I produced. Like he never really took off and had like a massive worldwide success, and I'd say now he's more known and respected than ever in his life. And it just took years of everybody, word of mouth, you know. I'm not saying that I want to be a cult figure that's like talked about years later. I'd love to be recognized right now, but legacy is legacy, no matter how it comes or when it comes, you know.
Since you mentioned the Emmett Rhodes thing, I mean, I think a lot of people were amazed that you were able to do that, produce that album after 36 years or 37
43 years.
43 years. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So 43 years after his album,
Yeah.
a lot of people tried,
Yeah.
but you succeeded. How did you succeed where other people failed to get him to make and release a record?
That's a tough question. I think that it's a combination of things. I think that part of it has to do with the fact that we were friends for years before we ever did any work together. When I met him, we never talked about music. I'd just come over and hang out with him because he was Emmett and I wanted to hang out with him. So we would just hang. We'd go to a bar, get a drink. We'd just sit around and just talk shit about whatever. And I think he knew after a while that I wasn't like a lot of other people that I think have come into his life that were pitching him on something, or like trying to get somewhere with him in a business sense. I wasn't that guy. I was just a pal, you know. I looked to him for advice, is what I did, because I was always working on my own stuff. So most of the time when we did talk about music, it was me trying to see what he thought of what I was doing. And he'd be brutal sometimes. But yeah, I mean, I think that had a lot to do with it. There was a certain trust and maybe respect that sort of built up between us that was crucial, I think, in order to get it done. We could start something because he started lots of things, but you can't finish it without the trust there, you know? But it also has to do with the fact that we made the record at his house. It was very low demand on him. You know, all he had to do was wake up and walk outside, you know, and then be there once we're there, you know. And he just had a bunch of tunes also. That's the other thing, is like he had all these great songs and a lot of them were fairly new when he approached me with them, because that's the thing. It's important to note that he just started showing me tunes. You know, I didn't ask him to. He said, "Hey, he brought out all these envelopes and started playing me tunes, and a lot of them were pretty recent. So it was a perfect storm, you know. I was there. We had a mutual trust. He had the room available for us to use, and he had great songs, you know. And it all came together. When it happens, it happens. You know, you can't plan it.
So you're now releasing your second album. You said it tonight that you recorded 45 songs or 44 songs.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you narrowed it down to 14.
Yeah.
Okay. So how do you do that? Because you played one of the ones that was not one of the 14.
Yeah.
And it sounded great. It was very catchy. I've heard you play it before.
Yeah.
How do you decide what's in the 14 and what's not in the 14?
So when I finished all this stuff, and I don't know that I ever really thought I was done, but after a certain point you have so many things, you're like, okay, now I need to figure out what it is. And at first I was like, am I making 4 albums? You know, because I could have with all of this stuff. It's like, no, that's too much. You're gonna bombard people with too much shit. So I tried to cut it in half, is what I did. And I got down to like 25 songs that I really thought, like, I need to put all this stuff out. And so I thought, this is a double album, you know, disc 1 and disc 2. And it just so happened that the first half of it was more upbeat electric stuff, and the second half it was more acoustic, laid back stuff. And so I thought, okay, we have disc 1 electric, disc 2 acoustic. And I pitched that to several people, including Omnivore, and almost everybody agreed, you got to get it down to a single disc. A double album is too much, you know. Not that it's not even too much artistically. It's too much financially to make a double disc of anything these days, especially if you're trying to do vinyl, which I was. So I went to a single disc, and I thought, I'll just take the concept that I had of half electric, half acoustic, and I'll make it that I'll just get down to the best of those two things.
So like two sides?
Yeah, originally I thought it was going to be 2 sides. And then the last minute before we went to mastering, I thought, let's just integrate it all and try and make a flow out of it. So it's about even split between lower key acoustic material and more like electric material. And originally it was going to be split, side A, side B, but now it's more integrated.
And why was it important to make it on vinyl? What does that have to do with rock and roll for you?
For me, well, I just love vinyl. I was a record collector since I was in high school, and vinyl, we were friends, my family was friends with an engineer named Tom Dowd, producer engineer, legendary guy, and he would come over to dinner, and at one point he agreed to come to my high school and do a talk to the kids in the rock ensemble. And he'd spent a bunch of time that day talking about analog sound versus digital sound, and about how when you go from analog to digital, you literally lose an entire dimension of sound, because analog sound is multi-dimensional and digital is just binary, it's ones and zeros. So you're losing almost a sheen on the music when you go from analog to digital. And that always stuck with me when he talked about that. And I haven't ever done vinyl of my own music before, and by this point the Emmett record came out on vinyl, the Linda Perhacs record I produced came out on vinyl. I just feel like I'm due finally to have like a big record in my hands. So that it's a personal taste thing, I guess, but I also think that there's a big demand these days for vinyl, more so than there has been in years. It's the only part of the